Hello, in this video I will show you how to install and configure Defguard in the latest version, which at the moment is 2.0. I will be installing Defguard on AWS. I have already set up a VPC, which has two subnets configured, one public and one private. I have also already started 3 EC2 instances for each of Defguard's components. So I have a separate EC2 for the core component, separate EC2 for the gateway, and a separate EC2 for the edge component. Just a quick explanation about the edge component. So previously this component was named proxy, but we decided to rename it to a less conflicting name, which is edge. And what is important, the EC2 instance for core was started in the private subnet, and it also does not have a public IP address assigned. On the other hand, the edge component and the gateway component was deployed to the public subnet, and they both have public IP address assigned. So this architecture was created using our recommended network segmentation in mind. I have also configured security groups for the EC2 instances. So right now, the EC2 for core allows only inbound traffic on port 443 and port 22, originating only from the gateway EC2 instance security group. So in this example, I will use the gateway EC2 as a bastion, allowing me to access the private EC2 instance for core. The security group for the gateway allows UDP connection for WireGuard on port 50555, allows SSH connections, and allows gRPC communication from core. The EC2 instance running the edge component allows HTTPS traffic, HTTP traffic, SSH, and gRPC communication from core. And obviously, after the installation and configuration phase, I would remove the inbound rules allowing you to access core using a bastion. I would suggest allowing only HTTPS traffic originating from the VPN network you configured in Defguard. I have 3 terminal windows opened here. Each one controls separate EC2 instance, so I have a separate one for core, for the gateway, and for the edge EC2. And I'll be using Docker Compose to start the core service, also Docker Compose to start the edge component, and I will use deb packages to install the gateway. Okay, let's start the installation. So I already have a Docker Compose file in my core EC2 instance. It consists 2 services, the core service and the Postgres service. I have only the basic environment variables configured here, so some secrets and database credentials. Also, as an example, I have mapped the default Defguard port to ports 80 and 443, and I am forwarding both of these to my local machine using an SSH tunnel. I have also configured a local domain in my etc hosts file that points to my machine. This allows me to access the core UI using a local domain instead of localhost. Of course, the method you use to access the Defguard UI initially is entirely up to you. Okay, let's start the core service. Yes, the service is running. And right now we can access the UI using the domain, the local domain that I have specified in my etc hosts. So the local domain that I have selected is demo8core.defguard.cloud. So right now you probably noticed that the connection is not secure, and we are also accessing the UI using HTTP. This will change over the course of the setup after we configure SSL. Okay, let's start the configuration then. First, I need to create an initial admin user. Now Defguard wants me to configure connection parameters. I will leave them as default and continue. The next step is about creating a custom certificate authority. This authority will be used in multiple ways. First of all, it will be used to issue certificates for additional Defguard components. So for the gateway and for the edge component. But in this setup, we will also use this certificate authority to issue certificate for configuring SSL. So let's just give it a name, an administrator email, and we can continue. Right now, I can download the certificate and I can continue. Okay, now Defguard wants me to configure the edge component. I have a bunch of examples on how I can run the edge component on a machine of my selection. So I will be using my separate EC2 instance, and I will be using a Docker Compose file to run the service. So I already have this example file transferred to my EC2 instance. Yes, it's here, and I can just run it. Okay, it's running. I can confirm that I have deployed the edge component. Right now I need to tell Defguard how to name the edge component and where it is. I will just name it edge1. And I will use the private IP address of my demo 8 edge EC2 instance. I will just copy the private address here. And right now I can tell Defguard to start the adoption process. The adoption process is all about issuing a custom certificate using a custom certificate authority that we have created in the previous step. This is required to make sure that the connection between the edge component and the core component is secure. We can continue. In this step, I have to specify the URL I will use to access the core component UI. So in my case, I want to use HTTPS demo8core.devguard.cloud. That is the local domain that I have set up in my etc hosts file. But in your case, that might be an entry in your private DNS. Next, I can decide how do I want to configure SSL. So I can skip the SSL configuration completely. This option is useful if you already have a reverse proxy that terminates SSL and you don't want Defguard to handle it. Or you have two additional options. One, to upload your own certificate, or use a very convenient mechanism to generate certificates based on the internal certificate authority that you have created previously. And I will use this option. Next, I can download the issued certificate. Defguard also suggests to import this certificate in my browser so that it is trusted. And I will also do that. I am running this example on a Mac. So in my case, that means adding this certificate to my keychain. Okay. And I can continue. Next is the external URL. So that is the URL of the edge component. In my case, I will be using HTTPS demo8edge.devguard.cloud. And I have already configured the DNS of my domain provider to point to the public IP address of the EC2 instance running Defguard Edge. Now I also have a bunch of options for configuring SSL. Same as before, I can skip the SSL configuration completely, and I have additional options available. Same as before, I can upload my own certificate. I can generate the certificate based on Defguard internal certificate authority, and I have another option where I can obtain the certificate using Let's Encrypt. What's convenient about this option is that Defguard will automatically obtain and renew the certificate for me. You just need to make sure that both the port for HTTP and HTTPS is available on this host. Okay, let's pick this option and continue. Now Defguard is issuing the certificate using Let's Encrypt, and it installed the certificate. I can continue. And here you can see the final step of the general system configuration, informing me that it is complete. And what I can do now is I can create my first location. Let's try to do it. Okay, Defguard opened another wizard, which will guide me through creating my first location. First, I need to give a name for my location. I will name it demo. And next, I need to provide the VPN public IP or domain. So in my case, that should be the public IP address of my EC2 instance that is running the gateway. So if I go to the AWS console, pick the gateway EC2, I will just copy the public IP of the gateway EC2. And I should also pick the VPN WireGuard port that will be used by the clients to connect to. So in my case, I picked a different port. I picked this one, so I will just have to change it in the wizard. And I can continue. Next, I should provide the internal VPN address. Let's use 10.10.20. Configure the allowed IPs, and I'm not using any private DNS right now. Let's continue. Here you can change the default values for your VPN location. I will just leave them as default and continue. You can decide if you want to enable multi-factor authentication for your location. For now, I will not enforce MFA. In the next step, you can decide whether all groups have access to this location or only a specific group. So if you have some additional groups here, you could decide that you want only, for example, the admin group to have access to this location. I want my location to be available to everyone, so I can just continue. And here I can decide if I want to use the firewall module to manage access to this location. For now, I will just disable the firewall option. At the bottom, you can see a section where Defguard suggests me to activate the location by setting up a gateway. And we will also do that in this guide. So I'll just make sure that this one is checked and I can create the location. And Defguard started another wizard. This wizard is about configuring the gateway. Defguard gives me examples on how I can run my gateway component. As I said before, I will be using package-based installation. So I will just copy a bunch of commands to install it. I'll just make sure that the package was installed. Yes, it was installed, and right now I can start the Defguard gateway service. And I can check the logs. Okay, I can confirm that I have deployed my gateway. I'll give a name for my gateway. And here I need to specify the IP or domain of my gateway. In my case, that should be also the private IP address of my EC2 instance running gateway. So I'll just copy the private IP. And I can continue with the adoption of my gateway. Same as with the edge component. The gateway was adopted, all the certificates were issued, and the communication is secure. And that's it. Basically, that means that your gateway instance was configured. You can go to your locations. And as you can see, the location was created. A gateway was connected. And also, there is an edge component also connected to the system. So what we can do now to prove that the setup is working, I can add a device to my administrator, and we can try to connect to the VPN and to see if it is working. So I'll just go to the user profile, and I will add a new device. I will use client activation. And since I already have my desktop client installed, I can just click one-click configuration, which should open up the desktop client and configure the device for me. So I can just click it, open Defguard, and as you can see, it already displayed a form to name my device. So I'll just name it admin's MacBook. And I can finish. Okay. My instance was configured, and I can see a list of locations. I only see a single location because that is the only location that we have in the system. And I can try to connect to this location. Okay, connection was successful. And right now we can go to the VPN overview section and check if the connection is visible in the VPN overview. And as you can see, there's one active user connected. We can also go to the users list, and you can see that admin's MacBook was connected. What is also important, since I have trusted the certificate issued based on the internal certificate authority, and I configured SSL using this certificate, Defguard redirected me to HTTPS after the general configuration. And as you can see, I can access Defguard using HTTPS without the need to configure a reverse proxy in front of it. Also, since Defguard issued a certificate for the Edge component using Let's Encrypt, I can access the UI of the Edge component using HTTPS without the need to configure a reverse proxy. So the domain we picked there was demo8edge. Defguard.cloud. And as you can see, I can access the UI of the Edge component using HTTPS as well. Okay, that covers the initial configuration. As you can see, the process was significantly improved compared to version 1 and is now guided using convenient wizards. If you're interested in migrating from version 1 instead of starting from scratch, we have a separate video covering this subject. Thanks for watching.